Croeso, Difta, Benachtin, Gia Which, Fulcha, Dama. Welcome to the Celtic Myths and Legends podcast. I am your humble host, Sian Esther Powell, and I'm going to be taking you on a journey through all the myths and legends of the 6 Celtic nations: Wales, Cornwall, Brittany, Isle of Man, Scotland and Ireland. Welcome. Yes, I'm still going for the acoustic intro. Hi everyone, your favourite Celtic Myths and Legends podcaster who never uploads episodes, even though she absolutely loves this podcast and really appreciates all her listeners, but just finds it very difficult to sit down and research and read and record and edit and do all of the things that you need to do to actually run a podcast, especially when it's by yourself and you don't have a podcast team, even though you compare yourself to other podcasts countlessly. Is countlessly a word? I don't know. Hello. It's dawned on me that I really simply must get a new microphone. This is the same one that I've been using since I started the podcast in December 2017. That is 8.5 years ago. And it was secondhand then. It was a secondhand microphone then, so I think it's really time to buy a new one. But that is a good sign for Blue Yeti microphones, of which I'm not being sponsored or paid at all by them. But I will say I bought this secondhand 8.5 years ago, and you know I can still use it today. And I've spilled tea on it. All sorts of stuff's gone on this poor little microphone, and it's still just about hanging on. But I do think that it's time for a new one, because I've tried recording this episode so many times, and it kept breaking, it kept cutting out, things kept going wrong, and my brain, when I'm stressed out and when I'm really busy, which is all of the time actually, which is every single day, if one thing goes wrong, my brain just goes, do you know what? No, let's pack it in. I can't do it. I can't add anything else to the plate right now. So my passion projects and things like the podcast get thrown to the side, even though it is my passion project. It is like my creative baby and I love it so much. But it means that if there's ever a hurdle, if anything even goes mildly wrong, my brain goes, nope, can't do it, absolutely can't do it, and it packs it in for another 3 months. So yeah, let's just get stuck right into this episode, shall we? Those of you who have ever listened before know that each episode we talk about one of the Celtic nations, and we are back to Ireland. Now, this is the episode where I wanted to talk about the Tuatha Danann, a subject that I have been desperate to cover for years, basically since I began this podcast, but a subject that also really scares me because there is so much to talk about and to break down, and I know that I can do a multiple part series, and you know what? That's just going to have to be what I'm going to do. But I've decided that for now, in order for me to actually release something, in the next 200 years, it's got to not be that for a moment. And I've got to actually force myself to write some kind of script. That's one thing I should say to you all, and it's going to be of no surprise to many of you. I don't script my work. Yes, I read all of the sources, and, I sort of sit with the information for a little bit. But when I press that records button, it's just me, baby. There's no script. There's not even any notes. I don't really have any notes in front of me. I probably did at the very, very beginning, but for the vast majority of this podcast, it's just me and my words and my thoughts, and it's very off the cuff. It's very much just me, as if I was a storyteller in front of you, kind of telling these stories. I don't have notes. I don't have anything to refer to. There's no script. Do you imagine if I had like a teleprompt? I wouldn't need that because it's a radio show. Not a radio, it's a podcast show, so you wouldn't know if I had one anyway. I'm rambling. Anyway, so we're back to Ireland. So instead of doing the Tuatha Danann this time, I am going to do a really interesting story, actually. It's a little bit Snow White, it's a little bit Children of Lear, it's a little bit Deirdre and her sorrows. There's quite a few things going into this, and that is the 12 Wild Geese. And this story has been taken from Patrick Kennedy's The Fireside Stories of Ireland, which was first published in 1870. Now, what I've usually done with stories is that I've summarised them in my own words, Well, this one, it's public domain, baby, and I thought it would be nice to just read the story as it is. I haven't done a nice, proper sit down by the fire and read a story to you all type of thing in a little while. And then after that, we can get into the discussion on it. The 12 Wild Geese. Ireland. There was once a king and queen that lived very happily together, and they had 12 sons and not a single daughter. We are always wishing for what we haven't, and we don't care for what we have. And so it was with the queen. One day in winter, when the bourne was covered with snow, she was looking out of the parlour window and saw there a calf that was just killed by the butcher, and a raven was standing near it. "Oh," said she, "if I had only a daughter with her skin as white as the snow, her cheeks as red as that blood, and her hair as black as that raven, I'd give away any one of my 12 sons for her." And the moment that she said those words, she got a great fright, and a shiver went through her, and in an instant after, a severe-looking old woman stood before her. "That was a wicked wish you made," said she, "and to punish you it will be granted. You will have such a daughter as you desire, but the very day of her birth you will lose your other children." She vanished the moment she said those words, and that was the very way that it turned out. When she expected her delivery, she had all of her children in a large room of the palace, with guards all around it. But the very hour her daughter came into the world, the guards inside and outside heard a great whirling and whistling, and the 12 princes were seen flying one after the other out through the open window, and away like so many arrows over the woods. Well, the king was in great grief for the loss of his sons, and he would be enraged with his wife if only he knew that she had so much to blame for it. Everyone called the little princess Snow White and Red Rose on account of her beautiful complexion. She was the most loving and the most lovable child that could be seen anywhere. When she was 12 years old, she began to be very sad and lonely, and to torment her mother, she asked about her brothers that she thought were dead, for none up to that time ever told her the exact thing that had happened to them, because none of them knew, and the secret was weighing very heavy on the queen's conscience. And as the little girl persevered in her questions, at last she told her. "Well, mother," said she, "it was on my account that my poor brothers were changed into wild geese, and they are now suffering all sorts of hardship. I will be off to seek them and try to restore them to their own shapes." The king and queen had her well watched, but all was of no use, for the next night she was out through the woods that surrounded the palace, and she went on and on that night until the evening of the next day. She had a few cakes with her, and she had nuts and fruits of the sweet briar and sweet crabs as she went along. At last she came to a nice wooden house just at sunset, and there was a fine garden around this house, full of the handsomest flowers, and a gate in the hedge. She went in and saw a table laid out with 12 plates and 12 knives and 12 forks and 12 spoons, and there were cakes and cold wild fowl and fruit along the plates. And there was a good fire, and in another long room there were 12 beds. Well, while she was looking about, she heard the gate opening and footsteps along the walk, and in came 12 young men. But there was a great grief and surprise on their faces when they laid eyes on her. "Oh, what misfortune sent you here?" said the eldest. "For the sake of a girl we were obliged to leave our father's court and be in the shape of wild geese all day. And that was 12 years ago, and we took a solemn oath that we would kill the first young girl that came into our hands. Oh God, it is a pity to put such an innocent girl as you out of this world. But must we keep our oath?" "But," she said, "I am your only sister, and I never knew anything until yesterday, and I stole away from our father and mother's palace last night to find you out and relieve you if I can." Every one of them clasped his hands and looked down on the floor, and you could hear a pin fall till the eldest cried out, "Well, a curse on our oath! Oh, what shall we do?" "I will tell you what," said the old woman that appeared amongst them in an instant. "Break your wicked oath, which you should not have kept. If you had attempted to lay an uncivil finger on her, I would have changed you into 12 stalks of ragweed. But I wish well to you, and I wish well to her. She is appointed to be your deliverer in this way. She must spin and knit 12 shirts for you out of bog down, to be gathered by her own hands on the moor just outside of the wood. It will take her 5 years to do it, and if she once speaks, or laughs, or cries the whole time, you will have to remain geese until the day that you are called out of this world. So take care of your sister, it is worth your while." The fairy then vanished, and it was only a strife with the brothers to see who would be first to kiss and hug their sister. So for 3 long years, the poor young princess was occupied pulling bog down, spinning it and knitting it into shirts. And at the end of the 3 years, she had 8 made. And during all of that time, she never spoke a word, nor laughed, nor cried. And the last was the hardest to refrain from. One fine day she was sitting in the garden spinning, when in sprung a fine greyhound and bounced up to her and laid his paws on her shoulder and licked her forehead and hair. The next minute a beautiful young prince rode up to the little garden gate, took off his hat and asked for leave to come in. She gave him a little nod, and in he walked. He made ever so many apologies for intruding, and asked her ever so many questions, but not a word could he get out of her. He loved her so much from the first moment that he could not leave till he told her he was king of a country just bordering on the forest, and he begged her to come home with him and be his wife. She couldn't help loving him as much as he did her, and though she shook her head very often and was very sorry to leave her brothers, at last she nodded her head and put her hand in his. She knew well enough that the good fairy and her brothers would be able to find her out. Before she went, she brought out a basket holding all of her bog down, and another holding the 8 shirts. The attendants took charge of these, and the prince placed her before him on his horse. The only thing that disturbed him while riding along was the displeasure his stepmother would feel at what he had done. However, he was full master at home, and as soon as he arrived, he sent for the bishop, got his bride nicely dressed, and the marriage was celebrated, the bride answering only by signs. He knew by her manners that she was of high birth, and no two could be fonder of each other. The wicked stepmother did all she could to make mischief, saying she was sure she was only a woodsman's daughter, but nothing could disturb the young king's opinion of his wife. In good time, the young queen was delivered of a beautiful boy, and the king was so glad he hardly knew what to do for joy. All the grandeur of the christening and the happiness of the parents tormented the bad woman more than I can tell you, and she was determined to put a stop to all their comfort. She got a sleeping posset given to the young mother, and while she was thinking how she could best make away with the child, she saw a wicked-looking wolf in the garden looking up at her and licking his chops. She lost no time, but snatched the child from the arms of the sleeping woman and pitched it out. The beast caught it in its mouth and was over the garden fence in a minute. The wicked woman then pricked her own finger and dabbled the blood round the mouth of the sleeping mother. Well, the young king was just then coming into the big bawn from hunting, and as soon as he entered the house she beckoned to him, shed a few crocodile tears, and began to cry and wring her hands, and hurried him along to the passage of the bedchamber. Oh, wasn't the poor king frightened when he saw the queen's mouth bloody and missed his child? It would take 2 hours to tell you the devilment of the old queen, the confusion, the fright and grief of young king and queen, the bad opinion he began to feel of his wife, and the struggle she had to keep down her bitter sorrow and not give way to it by speaking or lamenting. The young king would not allow anyone to be called, and ordered his stepmother to give out that the child had fell from the mother's arms at the window, and that a wild beast had run off with it. The wicked woman pretended to do so, but she told everybody that she spoke to what the king and herself saw in the bedchamber. The young queen was the most unhappy woman in the 3 kingdoms for a long time. Between sorrow for her child and her husband's bad opinion, still she neither spoke nor cried, and she gathered bogged down and went on with the shirts. Often the 12 wild geese would be seen lighting on the trees in the park or on the smooth sod and looking in at her window. So she worked on to get the shirts finished, but another year was at an end, and she had the 12th shirt finished except for one arm, when she was obliged to take to her bed, and a beautiful girl was born. Now the king was on his guard, and he would not let the mother and child be left alone for a minute. But the wicked woman bribed some of the attendants, set others asleep, gave the sleepy posset to the queen, and had a person watching to snatch the child away and kill it. But what should she see but the same wolf in the garden, looking up and licking his chops again? Out went the child, and away with it flew the wolf, and she smeared the sleeping mother's mouth and face with blood, and then roared and bawled and cried out to the king and to everybody she met, and the room was filled, and everyone was sure that the young queen had just devoured her own babe. The poor mother thought now her life would leave her. She was in such a state, and she could neither think nor pray, but she sat like a stone and worked away at the arm of the 12th shirt. The king was for taking her to the house in the wood where he found her, but the stepmother and the lords of the court and the judges would not hear of it, and she was condemned to be burned in the big barn at 3 o'clock the same day. When the hour drew near, the king went to the farthest part of his palace, and there was no more unhappy man in the whole of the kingdom at that hour. When the executioners came and led her off, she took the pile of shirts in her arms. There were still a few stitches, and while they were tying her to the stake, she still worked on. At the last stitch she seemed overcome and dropped a tear on her work, but the moment after she sprung up and shouted out, "I am innocent! Call my husband!" The executioners stayed their hands, except one wicked disposed creature who set fire to the wood next to him. And while all were struck in amaze, there was a rushing of wings, and in a moment the 12 wild geese were standing around the pile. Before you could count 12, she flung a shirt over every bird, and there, in the twinkling of an eye, were 12 of the finest young men that could be collected out of 1,000 men. While some were untying their sister, the eldest, taking a strong stake in his hand, struck the busy executioner such a blow that he never needed another. While they were comforting the young queen and the king was hurrying to the spot, a fine-looking woman appeared amongst them, holding the babe on one arm and the little prince by the hand. There was nothing but crying for joy and laughing for joy and hugging and kissing, and when anyone had time to thank the good fairy, who in the shape of a wolf had carried the child away, she was not to be found. Never was such happiness enjoyed in any palace that ever was built, and if the wicked queen and her helpers were not torn by wild horses, they would have richly deserved it. So I will be honest, I don't think this one was the best written. It did take me quite a long time to record that, and I did stumble over quite a lot of the writing. But I do really like the story. It's quite cliche. It's like a very standard, typical fairy tale. And I think I do quite like it because I recognise loads of other fairy tales in it. And I like the fact that, whatever, we kind of think of some fairy tales as being in a vacuum, but of course they're not. All fairy tales have been influenced by other stories that people have told, and have been influenced by each other and moulded by different storytellers. And I like that this one made me think of Snow White, obviously. It made me think of Deirdre. It made me think of the Children of Lear. It made me think of loads of different stories that I was familiar with, but it was still kind of doing its own thing. So a part of what I'm interested in this story is that it is quite a cliche story, and it is that there are so many other similar stories like it, and that is because I found it when I was looking through the Arne Thompson Uther type fairy tale, like the categories of fairy tales. And a lot of these have been collated together by a Professor D.L. Ashliman from University of Pittsburgh, it looks like, who it's a very old looking website, and I'll put it in the description of this episode, but it categorises all of these classic fairy tales by their fairy tale type or like trope or what have you. And this particular trope was the brothers who were turned into birds. And will you believe it? It's quite a common story. Apparently there's the 7 doves from Italy, there's the curse of the 7 children from Italy, the bewitched brothers from Romania, the 12 brothers from Germany, the 7 ravens and the 6 swans from Germany, the 12 wild ducks from Norway, the wild swans from Denmark, the little sister, the story of Suietta and the 9 brothers from Finland, and the sister and her 7 brothers from the Basque region, as well as Udea and her 7 brothers from Libya. So I've often said on this podcast that for me, folklore, it proves that people are more similar than different, and I absolutely love it. And I love that you can find similar tropes and similar legends around the world. And I love that then you can tell that there's some unique differences to different places depending on the culture, the religion, the landscape, the weather, what have you. But they still have these real core common similarities, and I really like it. It makes me feel a lot closer to the rest of humanity, if you will. So the 12 Wild Geese has been taken from Patrick Kennedy's The Fireside Stories of Ireland, as I mentioned before, which was published in 1870. And this apparently is from pages 14 to 19. So Patrick Kennedy was a folklorist from County Wexford in Ireland. He was an educator, and then he was a bookseller, and then started sort of collating and collecting and publishing various Irish folk tales, and especially the ones from where he was from in County Wexford. So he was from an interesting background. Apparently he was from a peasant family, but pretty well off. So a family that had come from humble beginnings, but was doing pretty well by the time he came along. So he had a good education. He went to various schools, and then was put up in one particular school where his board and tutoring was all paid for. And these were good, sort of well-regarded schools. So he did have a very good education. I do always find it quite interesting to learn the background of folklorists and people who have had an interest in folklore and compiled and collated folk tales, or even gone and done the actual research themselves and recorded oral histories and interviewed people themselves. It's quite interesting. There's always people, usually people that are sort of like middle to upper class in background, but many of them have had families from humble beginnings. So I'm not sure if that goes into, I don't know, it's interesting. I wonder what listeners' thoughts are on that subject. I think there's a lot to be said about the collecting of folklore and who does that and why, and the sort of motivations and the beliefs behind it. Do you know what I mean? Like thinking that, you know, there's a lot of talk about the rise of the Industrial Revolution, and then of course people thinking, oh gosh, all of these rural communities are about to be decimated, we better collect all of these stories before they just go. And you're still talking about times when not everyone is going to be like totally literate, so it's like, let's collect these stories, you know, whilst we can. So yeah, I do find there's something interesting there, and I wish I had something more coherent to say about that whole subject, but I'd be really curious to know what listeners think about that whole side of things. Who collects the folklore and why? Because obviously it's something that I think for myself, because that's sort of what I'm doing with this podcast really, isn't it? Is that I'm sharing folk tales that other people have collected, that other people have interviewed for. Now I will say, I can't go into it in too much detail, but I am working on something original that's folklore related, but is like reimagining and creating new folk tales. And guys, I am so excited. It is a book, I can say that much. I'm not signing an NDA for this thing or anything, it's a book. I'm working on a book, and you know, it's been a long time in the making, and I'm working with a really awesome illustrator, and I'm so excited about it, and I think it's going to be rad. I think it's going to be a really, really cool book. That's patting myself on the back a bit too much, but the illustrator I'm working with is incredible. She's so talented, and she's really bringing to life like the creatures that I have in my head. So I'm really, really excited about creating new folk tales. But I was having this strange feeling about, oh no, but I'm like making up stuff. That's bad, isn't it? You can't just make up stuff for folklore. And then I thought, well, of course you can. Stories are meant to evolve and change and adapt. Isn't that what I've been saying on this podcast for years? We can't just have stories be stagnant forever and held as in this place in the past that can't be changed. And I think that kills culture and storytelling and folklore when we sort of crystallize or fossilize these stories and have them as untouchable sacred relics of the past, when in fact storytelling of the folklore should be changing and evolving and adapting all of the time. And I'm one of the folk. I'm a person. I can tell stories. So yeah, that's one thing that I've got in the back burner at the moment, and I'm really, really excited about. So watch this space. So back to Patrick Kennedy. He was a teacher for a little while, and then, as I said, he became a bookseller. And it's quite nice because I've got this quote here. Edward Dowden remembered the proprietor with round, bald head, grizzled beard, and a smile and twinkle over all his face. I'm not going to lie, that does sound like my type of man. We like a smiley man with a twinkle in his eye. Very important. What is pretty cool is that Patrick Kennedy was said to be an inspiration to people like William Butler Yeats, and actually in the wider Celtic revival movement, which is really cool. As even he's even been accredited with actually preserving a lot of Irish idioms and like turns of phrase and stuff like that, which I think is really lovely. I'm not sure where he got this particular story from, but the Fireside Stories of Ireland seems to be one of his later publications. He mentions in the preface that a lot of the stories can actually be traced in similarity to other cultures around the world, belonging to different religions, different places around the world, and that, you know, these are the types of stories that country folk of the small farmer and peasant class resort to their neighbours' houses during the long winter evenings, urged by the same want which sends the shopkeepers and mechanics of a city to the reading or tap room or the theatres. They soon exhaust the local topics, but are unwilling to withdraw to the comparative loneliness of their own homes. And if one of the company possesses the faculties of a good memory and a good utterance, and condescends to tell a story, he or she is a social benefactor of the time. That is how I like to imagine my role in society, by the way. I don't really have a lot of useful skills, a lot of practical skills, but I am a good storyteller, guys. I am a decent storyteller, so I can at least whip out a good story. That can be my contribution to the friendship group, my contribution to social outings. So it's nice to see that is recognised and appreciated. Actually, Kennedy has quite an interesting thesis in this preface. You know, he's saying that their good storytellers are few and far between, because you need someone with good memory, you know, which I don't, by the way, oopsie. But you need someone with a good memory, a good utterance, but you need people that have retained these stories and the tradition of telling them. Whereas the kind of popularity in literature and penny dreadfuls and things like this meant that a lot of people were reading those and not so much, I'll say regurgitating is the wrong word, but not so much retelling and evolving and adapting old storytelling and old stories that they might have heard as children being told, you know, by their grandparents or what have you, and that less and less people were being told these stories in the house because of these factors. So I found that quite interesting, that this type of collecting of folklore is born of a need, and we often hear the whole story of like the rise in the Industrial Revolution and all that sort of stuff. So it's quite interesting to hear about the rise of popularity in literature and cheap books and penny dreadfuls and stuff like that, and actually how those things could also have been a influence on the waning of oral storytelling and the and causing the collectors of folktales, like people like Patrick Kennedy, to feel that it was really important to start putting pen to paper and creating text of what was once originally oral stories. You can tell I'm getting tired now, guys. I'm quite proud that I've managed to do an episode in the heatwave, to be honest with you. I'm not going to make any promises this time. I'm not going to say, do you know what, I'm definitely going to upload next month, because you know me and I probably won't. But I just wanted to assure you, I have now gone to part-time in my current job in the museum, and I'm putting a lot of time and effort into my other creative pursuits. So I am working on lots of folklore stuff. I'm working on lots of cool projects and hoping to put out a lot more interesting folklore culture stuff into the world. And I want to thank you so much for your patience, and thank you so much for continuing to listen to this little show. It's ever so lovely to have you here, and I hope that you continue to keep listening. So until next time, have a nice evening, day, morning, wherever you are in the world, and I will speak to you hopefully soon.